There's more to making manga than Lucy, Bussy, and Demodong. So as a manga writer, I'm going to show you how to write pacing and character depth if you guys like this kind of series. The first thing is we need to understand the term pacing. Pacing is essentially the flow of the story in terms of the speed in which you move through the story. I Hero Academia, notoriously bad pacing. As much as I complain about Demon Slayer, the pacing is actually not bad in Demon Slayer at all. Hunter x Hunter, the anime, actually has some pretty good pacing in it, especially the Chimera arc. And a final example is JJK actually flows really well until you get to the Sukuna fight, and then pacing goes out the window. And that actually highlights that the story pacing is one thing, and then your scene pacing and your arc pacing is completely separate. And they all play together in this beautiful symphony of a reader's enjoyable experience. It also is key to ensuring that you hook them appropriately so they don't drop your series halfway through. But how do you actually execute pacing? And before we get into it, you need to understand there's a lot of ways to skin this cat. For example, you can use a beat sheet, and there are multiple versions of a beat sheet. Some use 12 points, some use 8 points. I've seen them go up to 18 points. And pretty much you'll use these beats in order to navigate the 3 acts. You could use the hero's journey wheel in order to pace your story out. There are 12 parts of this. But at the end of the day, they'll usually follow this structure, and this is something that most people are going to be familiar with. And the thing that most people struggle with is the middle. This is the majority of your story. About 50% is going to fit within this. And then usually where you hear a lot of people complain about pacing is actually your rising action, which is where we can get something called the saggy center or saggy middle. That's basically where the author has an issue getting from the inciting incident to the climax, and so they'll tend to drag things out here, and then people just lose interest because it feels like the story's not going anywhere. But this is something closer to what I'll actually use whenever I draft my stories. As you can see, it's an up and down. It's like breathing in and out. However, they're not always the same because sometimes I'll need tension to rise a little bit sharper and sustain itself before we take that exhale. And this helps to really keep the reader on their toes because they know it's not going to go in a natural rhythm. So they're like, all right, well, 2 chapters from now, we're going to resolve this, and then something's going to happen, blah, 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 blah. But one thing you need to understand is even though we could probably break storytelling down into 20% at the beginning, 50 at the center, and then, that remaining 30% at the end for the falling action and climax, you need to study your genre. What is the pacing of your genre and your medium? And what I mean by that is initial mangas will usually have between 50 to 70 something pages in their first chapter to establish the world, the characters, all that good stuff. But you also need to have your inciting incident in your first chapter. And also the pacing is going to look a lot different in a serialized format like this, where it's going volume after volume after volume after volume versus a novel with 1 or 2 books, maybe even a trilogy. And so my recommendation for somebody, concrete advice, figure out where you want your story to start, like the entire series, where you want it to start, and then look at the end. Where do you want this series to end? And then try to figure out each of the major arcs and figure out how you're going to get there in terms of volumes. Does it look like it's a 5-volume series? 10, 20, 30, 50? Like, I know Night of Slaughter's pacing because there are different training arcs and the story is paced based on those training arcs. It doesn't mean we're going to sit through it all with Veronica. She may die. But the thing is, I know how long the series is going to go in terms of arcs. And this will help you not only pace out each arc, because each arc, think of it almost like as a book in itself. You're going to have the entire series pacing, and then you're going to have each arc's pacing. And then you'll, for the most part, use that story structure for each arc. It's going to have its inciting incident, it's going to have its rising action, it's going to have a climax, it's going to have a resolution. However, usually what you'll want to do with that resolution is set up the next arc and maybe even leave it off on a cliffhanger so you can have a nice, smooth transition into the introduction of the next inciting incident so you can flow right into the rising action. So let me know in the comments if you would actually like me to break this down using my own stories for what's out right now in terms of how I pace them out so you can actually get concrete examples of this. Or if you just want to go how to create chapter depth, let me know. Oh, and you can read these online for free or you can grab a copy off the TikTok shop.